Well done, Flynn. I'm concerned about keeping the study on track.
How do I cope with what's going on?
Dad, can we have some food, please?
Yeah, girls. I've got to go and do a conference call. There's just so much to do, and there's just not enough time.
Hello, I'm Katrina Blowers from 7 News and welcome to Parenting in a Pandemic. We're here to help your family through these challenging times, and I'm joined by world-recognised parenting expert, Professor Matt Sanders. Welcome again, Matt.
Hi, Katrina.
Well, Matt, the virus has really forced families to radically adapt how we live, and that means that we as parents are juggling more than we're probably used to right now. Suddenly, we are not just mum and dad, we're also teachers' aides, we're home-based workers. Some of us are short order cooks. I feel like I'm having to prepare meals every 2 seconds. We're referees, we're entertainers, and perhaps too we're job seekers trying to make ends meet. Matt, can you please give us some advice on how we can keep those plates spinning?
Well, look, now more than ever, I think people are finding that parenting is an absolute balancing act, with so many of us working on the multiple different fronts you've just mentioned, working from home, some are studying, supporting homeschooling, trying to stay connected to our extended families and friends. Many are supporting older relatives and neighbours, as well as the usual demands of family life. It's easy to see how people can be feeling a bit overwhelmed.
Yeah, there's a lot of pressure. You got to keep an eye on the kids, feed them, but you've got to run the household and do your job. Got to not get stressed about things not working properly. You've got to have fun with the kids. How's it all going, girls? You know, they're in the same situation as we are. What are you making their pee-pee? They're finding it really new. My work's probably not, it has been online for a long time. But kids are online and they're not getting to get out. So you've got to think of them and just relax and just take a bit easy. It's not easy though.
So, given that we are trying to juggle all the usual things with family life with working from home, how do we combine the two without feeling guilt? I know I'm feeling a lot of guilt right now because I'm not giving the best of myself to my kids or to my job.
I think it's really important that we're pretty realistic about what is actually achievable at the moment. I think now is the time to really be rethinking our priorities. What is the most important thing that's going on in our family lives? And I think we need to be elevating the needs of children as a top priority for families, because if we don't, it can really come back to haunt us. For example, it's just not realistic for employers to expect people to be on hours and hours of video conferencing calls a day while they've got young children at home.
I've spoken to a lot of mums who are feeling very guilty right now about the amount of screen time their children are having so that they can put in some productive hours during the day working. What would you say? How do we navigate with those competing needs?
I think one of the most basic things is that when we think about working from home, we should be really starting to think about setting some daily goals that enable us by the end of the day to reflect back and to experience a sense of accomplishment. And I think that recognising that our capacity to work really depends on children's capacity to be engaged in activities. There's no magic formula. It really depends a lot on the age of children and their capacity to amuse themselves. And I think this is why it's so important that when we're parenting our kids and trying to work, we're alternating periods of sustained focus in our own work with alternating periods of providing attention for children and setting them up in independent activity. But young kids are only able to spend relatively brief amounts of time with no adult supervision. And it's unreasonable to expect them to be able to do more.
And are you able to impart some wisdom there for setting children up to succeed in that respect? How do you build that independence in them to be able to sit there for longer periods of time doing independent activities?
Well, you've got to work out, first of all, what they're capable of doing without much direction and instruction. And there are plenty of kids who are kind of eagerly looking to get involved in the schoolwork of the day. And I think the most important thing in some ways is setting a bit of structure around it so that you're preparing the kids for what it is that they're expected to do in the next time block. I think the main thing is that while children are working, that you're accessible enough to provide them with just enough assistance to enable them to do what they need to do. But if you hover and you're around all the time, children are not learning to do it independently and will become more and more reliant on you for assistance in doing tasks that they potentially at school would be doing on their own.
Well, thank you, Matt. I can definitely hear some things that I may be doing wrong. Well, up next, we'll look at the brave new world of homeschooling, and Matt is going to give us some very helpful tips for how to keep those young minds on track. Thanks for joining us. Well, we are learning how to juggle multiple family responsibilities in this time of drastic change. And Matt, coming to grips with homeschooling has not been easy for many parents. I'm going to stick my hand up. I have not found it easy at all. Are there some ways that we can make it more manageable for everyone involved?
One of the challenges is just to be realistic about how we tackle this task. And I think if there was one thing overall that I'd say is really important is just to stay reasonably calm, because if you get stressed and you get anxious about it, it makes it so much more difficult to navigate what's required of you. I think it's important in this situation not to be too tough on yourself as a parent, because you're not expected to be a classroom teacher or to behave in the way a classroom teacher would. And in a lot of ways, we've got to rely on a bit of trust in the education system and in our teachers that what they're setting for their children to do is reasonable and is appropriate to meet your children's educational needs. Now, if you think about teachers in a classroom, they're dividing their attention up to 28 students, all of whom are working at different paces, and they have different needs and different levels of support that are required. If at home we can get 2 to 3 hours of learning each day out of young children, I think we're doing pretty well. I reckon it's a very good idea to try to set up a timetable and to establish some clear expectations of what is required for children in each of the time blocks that you're trying to organise at home.
And we're going to do a little bit of reading.
And by setting up a predictable routine, both you and your child can prepare themselves for what's actually needed in that next time block, and it becomes much easier then, for example, if the kids are having a Zoom meeting, that that during this period of time, they can't really be interrupted, and it's important to allow this to occur without, too much adult involvement. So as kids are getting older, more and more of their schoolwork is likely to be self-directed, and it's just important that children understand what the instructions are and that they know what is being asked of them. And then you're able to just sort of check in on how they're going rather than feeling as though you've got to be there all the time, and recognising that children can gradually increase the amount of time that they have sort of focused involvement in independent learning and indeed in playtime, so that you can think about kids of being able to manage 10 minutes or 15 minutes and then up to 30 minutes, and see them being able to gradually build their attention and concentration the more they get into the school activities that they're involved in.
I like that. Very good advice about building more structure in so they can burn off some energy as the day goes on.
Yeah, and I think it's also important to just remind ourselves that different kinds of schoolwork require a different type of adult involvement. And so when you're thinking about organising your work and time that you're involved in the supervision of children, that you've got a rough idea of how long things are going to be able that children will be involved in them, and then there needs to be time that you're available to interrupt your own work. But the other thing that I'd just say is that, you know, if you're alternating periods of screen time and book activities with children with fun activities and play, and where kids can burn off some energy, have some physical activity, and just be involved in creative play, then you're getting a kind of a balance that is reasonable.
That's excellent advice, and I know getting outside has certainly helped my family to cope with these long days of homeschooling too. Well, stay with us, because coming up we are going to explore how to keep your children more creative and encourage independence during this time. Welcome back to Parenting in a Pandemic. And Matt, we're talking about juggling family responsibilities right now. And one of the big tasks for parents is making sure that our kids are happily engaged, but also entertained. I guess what advice would you have, Matt, for encouraging children to be creative, but also to be independent? That's kind of the holy grail for parents.
It's very interesting when you think about children being busy and being able to entertain themselves so that they're neither bored nor getting into trouble. In a lot of ways, that the capacity of children to be independent and to be able to use their imaginations is the formula for keeping kids self-absorbed in activities that take the responsibility away from us of having to be the entertainer, the organiser, the person who finds things for kids to do. It's interesting because if you think about the range of activities that children could potentially be involved in a lot of ways, if kids discover these activities themselves without having to be prompted or nudged or reminded or even checking a list, that's great. But there are some kids who can't. So it's useful then when kids say, you know, I'm bored, there's nothing to do, to have a range of activities that are listed on the fridge that have ideas that they can incorporate into their play, into their activities over the course of the day.
What about making yourself a movie using the iPhones?
And of course, these will vary depending upon the age of children. But if you think about children's involvement in activities like art and painting and drawing and making music, listening to music, movement and creative play, these are processes that enable children to be not only entertained, but to have great fun. And one of the things that is so neat about kids being involved in imaginative play is they just love an audience. They love adults in their social world to watch what they're doing, so they can put on a little show or a play or some kind of performance that can keep them busy for ages in preparing it, and then a short time for delivering it to an appreciative audience.
How important is creative play in terms of development?
Oh, I think it's very important. The world of play is imaginative play. It's a context for developing children's language, their problem solving, their sociability. It's a way of kids developing their sort of planning and organising skills to bring everything they need to bear to be able to create the performance or create the activity that they're wanting to turn into something that's really fun, really enjoyable and shareable. And in a lot of ways, it's about kids creating challenges for themselves. And in the process of creating challenges, kids will experience a few setbacks. Things won't quite work out the way they wanted them to. And by having these kind of challenges, children are building their capabilities of tackling more complex and challenging things that enable them that really does promote their development. But while kids are trying to do this, it's really important for parents to be aware of just how important their attention is to children who are busy and who are engaged in these sort of creative activities as an audience, sometimes just simply watching, being there. Children know that you're interested in watching, and then making an interested comment about their activities or what they're trying to do builds their engagement further. So it promotes greater interest and sustained involvement in an activity.
That's excellent.
Which means that they're more likely to do it independently for longer next time, which is what we all want.
And isn't that the key? Because children who are self-absorbed means they don't have to have screens to entertain them. They don't have to have adults constantly organising what children are doing, because the kids themselves are hungry for activities that they are planning.
I love the sound of this. Thank you so much, Matt. Some great gems of advice there. Well, when we come back, how to make sure you have more energy and more resilience to cope with the days ahead. Welcome back. Thanks so much for being with us. Well, we've talked a lot today about all of our extra responsibilities right now and how they can chew up so much of our time, but also our energy. Matt, what advice do you have of what we can do to sustain ourselves?
Because of these multiple demands, the most fundamental thing is that we actually have to take care of some of our own needs. And if you think about just what's important to many parents in this situation, we actually need some time alone. We need a break from the constancy of the supervision of children. We need actually to be able to have a rest at times, and we need, for our own needs, for intimacy, for privacy, for a break, to be attended to. And now, how hard is that when you're living with everyone, underfoot? It's much more difficult than it would normally be. And therefore, we need to be able to take some periods of time where we just remove ourselves from what's going on, and our partners or someone else is assisting with, kind of the running of the household at that time, but to take a little bit of a break. I think also parents are realising now they've got the time to really think through their life and how they've organised it in the past. Some parents are really realising how little time they've actually spent with their children prior to this sort of social isolation, and that's partly feeding the guilt that I think some parents are experiencing right now.
Parenting in this pandemic is interesting. I wouldn't say it's easy, and it's certainly not a scenario I think a lot of us would choose.
Okay, gotcha.
Pre-COVID, do a lot of sport, but not as a family, individually. It would be quite nice to keep doing that. Some things that we'll continue to do will be working from home. I think that's providing a good balance. Pre-COVID, we probably had lost sight of that balance a little bit. So this has given us time to reassess, I suppose, and hope post-COVID we'll be stronger, yeah.
So it's an opportunity to reappraise what's important to us. And if you think about the well-being of your children and of your family as being so fundamental to the well-being of you yourself individually, and in fact, our whole community, I would not be surprised if there are many parents who are not saying to themselves, right now, I need to give much more of a focus on the well-being of my kids and families than I used to.
You have certainly gone through many areas where we are multi-skilling right now as parents, and we all feel like we're being pulled in so many different directions, working and parenting and being partners or being, daughters or sons to our ageing parents too. Can you just sum up for us some of the crucial tips that you've gone through for mastering the juggling act?
I think the In a snapshot, we're talking about being realistic about what's achievable when you're working from home and looking after children all day. You really need to set some doable goals that are achievable by the end of the day so you can reflect and have a sense of accomplishment. Set up a timetable, have clear expectations of your children as well, and this will help them get started on their play activities or their schoolwork. And it means that you only provide kids as much assistance as they require in order to get on with it. You don't have to be there all the time hovering in order for kids to really be able to absorb themselves in activities. If we can encourage independence in children, this really helps because it means that they can be involved in a lot of creative and imaginative activities that are fun as well. And then finally, just taking care of our own needs and thinking about how to devote time in your waking day to those things that are really important to you.
Sometimes all it takes is just a few minutes, I've found, to come back refreshed. Thank you, Matt. You've given us so much great advice today, and I'm sure you've given us all hope for handling what's on our plate over the next few weeks.
Oh, it's lovely to have been involved, Katrina.
Well, as always, there are some great resources for you to explore online on a range of parenting in a pandemic issues. Next week, we'll be looking at the crucial challenge of managing anger and some of those strong emotions that we're all experiencing within our families right now. Until then, stay well and thanks for your company.